And with that, we will kick off into our first talk with Dave Rowland and Sudara Williams. So Dave is the head of engineering at Tracktion and Prism Sound, and Sudara is an independent developer at Melatonin, and they're going to unveil an extension on a tool that Dave has been working on for a couple of years now called Pluginval, which is a great way to test your plugin. And he's going to explain a lot more about what that actually means. And now they've teamed up to extend this to a tool that can be used online. And so I will now give the mic over to Dave and Sudara, and we're excited to hear this talk. Take it away, Dave.
Hi. So the news from my side is that as Josh said, I've been working on Pluginval for a number of years as a tool to help people test their plugins. So me and Sudara have been working together to update that to a version 1 status, and I'll just list through kind of essentially what that means. A brief bit of background on what Pluginval is used for, and then we'll kind of go over to the more fun new stuff. So bear with me for a second. So Pluginval is essentially a Juice 7 plugin host that will load plugins and call functions on them. Its primary use is for test coverage. So you can load a plugin and ensure all its functions are called. So that includes opening the GUI, closing the GUI, getting the strings of all the parameters, all the areas that might not necessarily get called in kind of day-to-day use in a traditional DAW. And it also does a bunch of stuff like testing for different block sizes and sample rates, and will simulate parameter changes whilst processing. You know, all the kind of things that a DAW might do for you, it tries to do in a really condensed, quick way. This can help find lots of bugs. I've seen bugs from lots of commercial plugins where if you just happen to call a parameter that's really high that people don't often, you know, that code path just hasn't been tested. So this is a good way to kind of get that. It also uses more kind of traditional test tool methodology. So you can repeat the number of tests, so you can run them continuously for a period of time or a number of iterations. You can randomize the order that things are called in, so that can kind of simulate different environments. But any randomization is deterministic, so it can run its own random seed, or you can provide it with a random seed. So if you get a failure on your CI, you can then run it locally and probably reproduce the issue. So it can be used in 3 rough sort of modes. There's a very quick kind of scan, really. Well, it will just run through the basic set of plugin functionality. Then there's the kind of plugin API conformance, I kind of call it, where it will try and do pretty much everything that a plugin API can do within reason. And then there's a sort of extreme mode stress testing environment, which will do lots of different things on different threads to try and really stress test your plugin. And that can be a good way to find edge case bugs or bugs that are caused by multiple threads, and that can lead to also kind of, you know, timing issues. You can use it in different modes. There's a kind of front-end GUI mode where essentially a plugin list that you can scan for plugins and then test those. It can be used in also a command line interface as a kind of command line tool, which is really useful for running things on CI. And you can also use it as run it via the command line from your IDE, so you can just make it a target and, you know, continuously run it as part of your development process. So that's kind of the background and what it's for and how it can be used. If you want to find out more about how you can implement it into your toolchain, go to the Pluginval GitHub, which I think Josh will put the address in somewhere. And there's more information and some documents to show you exactly how to implement it into the various different ways. There's a few new things that have been added in version 1. So the first of these is that the command line interface has been slightly simplified. A few of the flags have been removed because they're no longer necessary. And you can now just call Pluginval, so the app name, and then a path to a plugin, and it should do the kind of standard validation process. We've removed the validating in a separate process via the command line because it's not really needed if you're running via the command line. You can just call it multiple times if you want to scan multiple plugins, and that gives you better stack trace reporting as well. There's improved login and information messages. So if you're trying to do something and there's a failure, it might give you more of a hint as to why that's failed and how to go about fixing it. And there's also improved plugin API conformance. So VST3 has some threading restrictions that it now conforms with. There's also a couple of new features, I guess. The first one is that if you're validating AUs on a Mac, it will now call AUVal automatically for you. So rather than having to have two separate tools to run AUVal and then Pluginval, it will just run that and then spit the output to you if AUVal fails or if you add the verbose flag. And similarly, if you provide it a path to the VST3 validator app, it will run that and give you the output of it. I'm currently looking into whether we can bundle the validator app, but I'll need to look into the licensing and see whether it conforms. I think it might do because as far as I'm aware, you can use it under the GPL. And because Pluginval is GPL, because it uses Juice under the GPL, I think that all fits together, but maybe someone who knows more about licensing can tell me yes or no on that. On the back end, we've improved the CI process. So if you want to get a good idea of how to do GitHub Actions, Sudara has done a really good job of kind of moving everything into really nice GitHub YAML. So that's really nice now. And it now, from Pluginval to validate itself, it now builds the Juice plugins that are in the Juice repo and validates those. So it kind of dog foods itself so we get CI passes. And there's a lot of CMake caching going on in the back end with GitHub Actions. So the build times have rapidly improved. So that might be something you want to look at as well. So that's kind of the big news on Pluginval front. The release went up today, so go ahead, grab that and check it out. But the other thing I wanted to say is this is kind of a real testament to open source and community development. I think Sudara contacted me, actually, he's been pestering me for a while to do some stuff for Pluginval, but I finally kind of made a bit of space and said, okay, what do you want to kind of to do with this? And we've just been working together mainly through Discord and also GitHub pull requests and things to work on it together, really. And this is actually the first time we've met. This is also the first time we've even spoken kind of vocally. So, great things can happen if you just reach out to people and get involved in projects. That's what open source development is all about. And Pluginval is an ongoing project. If you want to contribute to it, pull requests are welcome. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to get to everything immediately, but if you make a good case, then I'm sure it'll raise up the priority list. So that's kind of things from my end.
Fantastic. And I'll just interject very quickly before we turn it over to Sudara and talk about and just very quickly emphasize that people always ask on our Discord community about ways to find new job opportunities and to get experience with audio software development for prospective employers. And what you were talking about is probably one of the best ways that you can actually do this, which is contributing to open source projects such as this and getting involved. A lot of times people feel that there's that they're not ready yet for that, but I think that it's important just to get in, get your feet wet, try to be productive, try to find something that you can contribute to, or even just reading through the code, making suggestions. Just getting involved in the community is a really great way to gain that experience to where you would be able to start doing this for a company if that's your ambition. So So yeah, it's awesome. And with that, I will turn it over to Sudara.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I guess so. I worked with Dave on, I guess, modernizing this this CI pipeline. So making sure that everything is built in the cloud easily. It's testing itself. It's dogfooding itself. And but yeah, the context. I think the bigger context here is that I'm a plugin developer and a musician and a synthesizer lover. Lots of synthesizers, and I'm building a synthesizer. And so I have lots of tasks. I have to do UI and design and all the DSP, and it's indie operation. So it's like, why am I suddenly pulled to this other task? Is it necessary? Is it important? What is, how important is validation and all that? And I just wanted to say, from that bigger picture context, I think this tool that Dave built is amazing and such a gift to the community, because the landscape with plugins is really kind of hairy. Like, you're dealing cross-platform, you got Mac, you got Windows, you got Linux, if you can invest the energy to do it. And then you have all the different programs like Logic and Pro Tools and Ableton and across all these platforms. And there's already frameworks like Juice behind the scenes making life easy for you. But when it comes to actually testing your plugin and making sure it's going to work when you ship it out to users, then it can get pretty nasty. And the last, you don't really want to do all the work building your product and then at the very end find out you have all these complicated things you have to unravel. So I'm a big believer in automated testing to help solve that problem. What it does is it bubbles up all those issues, right into your face right away as soon as they occur, so that you can just fix them and move on, and you're not going to ship your product and have a user run into those and find out the hard way that you have something wrong. And so Pluginval, what Dave's built, really stress tests your plugin and makes sure to kind of bubble up all, it does fuzz testing. It really can hammer it and make sure all these weird edge cases will bubble up, and you can tackle them ahead of time. So I really want to help with this project. And I also have been spending a lot of time with automated testing in general, my own plugin that I'm making, which is a synthesizer. And so I helped build the backend, and somewhere along all this work, I was like, it would be pretty easy to run a service where it just sends these plugins off and gets validated, and you can just drag and drop on a website. Okay, so like 80 hours later, here we are. And it was actually quite hairy, but yeah, I think it was worth it, because I think the more that we can get plugin devs to sort of check this tool out and see what it can do for them, lower the barrier, make it friction free, the better, because it really will save plugin developers lots of time and headache if this happens up front. And I think the ideal case actually is, if you get a little taste about what validation can do for you as a plugin dev, you can build it into your CI pipeline most ideally, so that it's running all the time and it's just catching stuff as you add the bugs, and you can just immediately handle it. So I think that's the ideal case. I have an example of that on GitHub of a kind of an empty plugin app that has all that set up. If you're doing open source, then you can just use GitHub Actions to do that for free. And that's great. So you can sort of get all this experience setting up this pipeline and having everything test. And then you can actually just focus on your product and not worry that all these things are going to kind of bite you in the end. So it sounds like more work, and setting up the pipeline might take a little bit of work, but it's like, you invest a little bit of work up front and you just mitigate all these potential problems down the line. So anyway, Joshua, I think, is going to give a live demo of this website that I threw together, and has kindly sponsored, along with Tracktion, the backend servers for this site. So it's called validatemyplugin.com. And Joshua, why don't you give it a whirl and see if a live demo has good luck today?
Yeah. So this is my big performance, my big moment here. So yeah, just sharing the screen here. So this is the website, Validate My Plugin, and it's pretty straightforward. Sudara, can you tell them a little bit about just what the requirements are for this to work properly?
Sure, it's cross-platform, Windows, Mac, or Linux. It's only doing VST3 and audio units. So basically what you want to do is just zip up your component or your VST3 and then just drag it on there. The one thing that it doesn't do is if you need to build your Mac plugin to be a universal binary, it can't just be Apple Silicon. So it can't just be built on your M1 because the runners are kind of old school. So it needs to be universal or x86. So, but yeah, you just zip your plugin file, drop it on there, and let's see if it works.
There we go. So I grab my zip, dropping it on the validator now, and dropping it.
Uploads, takes you to what looks like a terminal, which is output, and basically it's sending it over to a runner, which is going to pick up the job. And so if you uploaded a Linux plugin like we did here, then a Linux runner will pick it up and just run Pluginval against it. And this will take 20 seconds. And so we'll fill 20 seconds with, I don't know, dancing around a little bit or going to get a cup of coffee. And then it'll output a bunch of logs with all the details of the run. And it should tell you overall, did it pass? Did it fail? And if it failed, there's details in the logs for you there. And in the case that there was an issue with validation, then the best thing to do is just go download Pluginval itself and run it locally. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it says success, and the logs are required. They're being downloaded, and there was an error. Logs failed to be parsed. Nice.
Oh, no. Okay.
That's pretty funny. Well, if you scroll down a bit to the FAQ, there's a frequently asked questions at the bottom, and there's a, can I see an example run, the third one from the top?
Yeah.
And go there. So that'll show you what a success case looks like. I'll have to look, I guess, as to why this errored, because we even sound checked it, and apparently it's quite a sophisticated process. And actually, this tool is really well tested. Like all kinds of zip files can be uploaded, all kinds of plugins, and it does its best, but apparently it's not bulletproof quite yet.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit, you or Dave, can you talk a little bit about exactly what it's doing? Because I think for some people that may be starting out, they may not even be so clear as to what's happening here. Why is this tool so important for plugin developers? Just a very high level overview.
Do you want me to just kind of, I can run through, if you leave this up on screen, I can kind of just run through what it's doing in terms of the test cases. So
that sounds great.
So the first thing it does is try to scan it, because it has to kind of get a handle to the plugin to be able to run. So that's what that num plugins found output is, and then it will give you the output, the version number of them. Next thing, where there's like dotted lines, that's a different test case. So you can see the whole thing's chunked up into lots of different test cases. Then it tries to open the plugin GUI, and then it closes it and tries to open it again. And if you've got verbose login on, it will tell you how long that took. So you can see if, it's much quicker opening it the second time. Then what do? We try and get some plugin information. So it will say, ask your plugin for its name, alternative names. Sometimes you can report shorter names for plugins. If you report any latency, any tail length, whether you support double precision. So you can see how it's just calling all these things that you may not even know are present in your plugin. And if you've half implemented one of these functions or something, then this is going to probably crash at that point. Or at least you can look at the log and say, oh, that's not my plugin name. I should fix that. Then it checks for any kind of built-in programs, and it will, I think, try and change those if you have any. This one doesn't have any though. Then it tries to open the editor in a different case. I think this is where it's already been prepared with sample rate and the block size. You can see there's a test that tries to do some processing and opens the editor whilst it's doing that. A bunch of different sample rates and block sizes are used to just run the processing block. There's a few tests that do things like set a new sample rate without calling release resources on the old one, although not in VST3 because I don't think that's allowed anymore. But these kind of situations that you might not think of when you're building a plugin that hosts can do. Like I think there's one test for calling process block with 0 samples, especially a number of samples less than were called in prepare to play. And that's something that gets a lot of people who are new to plugin development. They say, well, I was prepared with 512 samples. Why am I now getting called with 64? And the reason for that is because that tends to be how automation works in hosts. But it's these surprises that it can test early on. Then what have we got? We've got a bunch of stuff for changing parameters whilst doing processing. I think this is doing some of the stress testing. So it's changing parameters on a background thread whilst doing processing on a different thread. There's getting buses. There's AUVal and VST3 validator runs there. But of course, this is a Linux VST3. So that wasn't used and the validator app isn't bundled at the moment. Some more bus stuff, disabling buses, enabling buses, changing channel layouts, and fuzz testing parameters. So just trying to set them to a bunch of different values. And it does all that in, 20 seconds, something like that. So you can see if you make this part of your CI, every time you do a commit, it does all of this kind of seamlessly behind the scenes. That simulates a lot of real world usage from your plugin, so it can really help you get some information about it back quickly.
Fantastic. Yeah, so basically what you're saying there is that a lot of people who are just starting off with plugin development, they're really only thinking about the application side of the development, the actual product itself. And then you have all of these different scenarios that this plugin needs to run in, right? So different DAWs, different operating systems, and so on. And so what Pluginval is doing is it's actually simulating those different scenarios that may happen within the host, different scenarios that the user may do with your plugin that are unexpected, just to make sure that your plugin actually stands up to those different environments. And then if there are problems, then it'll basically kick it back, let you know that hey, your sample rate is 0. It's not supposed to be 0. It's not a valid sample rate. Doesn't have any output channels under this scenario. I don't know, and basically kicks it back to you. So once it passes this, then you can ensure that it's a more robust product that will actually stand up.
I think a good way to think about software development is it's releasing stuff is all about confidence. So when you do your first, hello world, or you're getting it and you do your initial commit, your confidence that you can release that is probably very low because there's no testing, no continued work on it or anything. And what you're aiming for is a kind of a level of confidence that means when you release it to people who may or may not pay money for it, they can use it properly. And I think what Pluginval does is it just gives you that increased confidence, so it's being kind of used in at least a number of different ways continuously. One more thing I would say is, apart from doing the kind of stress testing, there are also some performance kind of tests. So it will, on level 10, I think it will do checks for memory allocations in the audio thread, which is a kind of common reason for getting poor performance or occasional poor performance, should I say. So it will also check for those kind of scenarios to kind of catch, I don't know what you call them, faux pas or bad practice.
Yes. And why don't, and for people that are just starting off, why wouldn't you want to do any memory allocations on the audio thread?
Well, I'd probably refer you to a talk me and Fabian gave called Real Time 101 at ADC, because that was like a 2-hour investigation of exactly this kind of thing. But the short reason is that if you do a memory allocation, you have to get a lock on the whole process, because other threads might be trying to get memory or releasing memory, which means that you're effectively waiting for the rest of your system to be free before you get any memory back. And that could be more than a few milliseconds, which is all you have in the audio world.
Right. So when your audio callback function is happening, if you have a function that's calling and you don't know how much time it'll take for that function to return or to finish, then that can cause a break in your audio, which would be bad for your application.
It's also slightly worse than that, because you can end up getting into a situation called priority inversion, where if you have a thread that you're contending with has lower priority and you end up competing for a lock with it, the operating system, depending on how it's set up, can deprioritize whatever your audio thread is calling on to be the priority of the thread that it's contending with. So now your kind of high real-time audio thread has got pushed off because it says you're not playing by the rules, and then you get poor performance even if there are no more allocations. The operating system behavior will vary, but that's kind of theoretically the worst case scenario.
Yeah, and there's a I would call it iconic talk that you and Fabian did at ADC a couple of years ago. What was it called? Real time. Do you remember the actual Real Time 101? Yeah, and there are actually 2 parts to it. So it's 2-hour talk, and it's with Fabian. Hi, Fabian, if you're watching, and Fabian and Dave, and they cover so many of these various scenarios that can happen, thread switching and more complex cases, and what to do about them. So if you're looking to make a deep dive into the world of lock-free systems in C++, that's a great place to get started.
Yeah, I would just a small word on that. There is a 2-part 2-hour length talk that we did at ADC, but we also did kind of the same material but without a few extra examples and questions at Meeting C++. So if you've only got sort of 50 minutes, you can watch that version as well to get the kind of the condensed form.
Yeah.
Oh, and one other thing, while we're talking about talks, years ago when I first released Pluginval, which is probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, I gave a talk at ADC called Pluginval, Why Validate Plugins, which goes into a bunch of these kind of scenarios about different operating systems, different plugin formats, different hosts, and just kind of helps you visualize the landscape and what you're exposed to as to why tools like this are useful.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a number of questions. Some of those you and Sudara have already answered more or less, but maybe you want to expand upon them. One question that I wanted to ask for myself were that you talked about how for Mac that Pluginval can call AUVal, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how those two are different, or if they're mostly the same, or if there are any differences between those two.
Yeah, so AUVal was actually the inspiration for Pluginval. On the Mac, you have AUVal, which does essentially the same things, but it was only available for audio units and only on the Mac. And I wanted to make a tool that you could use VST, VST3 across all different platforms, so we could test our plugins more thoroughly. And then I wanted to go a bit further than what AUVal does. So I think AUVal will do a lot of the things like calling parameter functions, setting parameters, processing in different chunks and things, but I don't think it does some of the more heavy lifting stuff that Pluginval does, like checking for allocations on the audio thread and bits and pieces like that. So
yeah. Yeah, so for people that may not know, if you have if you're on Mac and you happen to have Logic, when you open up Logic and you have a new plugin, it runs AU-Val on through all of the plugins to validate those and ensure that they're safe to run within Logic. And you may have had scenarios where when you start it up, it tests out the new plugin that you just got, and it says, hey, validation failed for one reason or another, and it might try to disclude that plugin from your plugin list because it failed the validation. So that's what AU-Val actually is. For people that don't know, you may have used it and not even realized. So a question for Sudara is from Paul Davis, who asks, is that a Kawai K5000 on the top rack on the left?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's thanks to Cesare, actually. I'm building an additive synth, so I'm very interested in the history of additive synthesizers. And so, yeah, that top one is a Kawai K5000.
Big shout out to Cesare Ferrari, who is now part of the SoundStacks team. So he's doing a lot of great things with Jules over there. Okay, great. And then there's a question which we've mostly already answered. This comes from Tugrul, who asks, I have experienced that sometimes different DAWs behave differently, mostly on program changes or presets. How do you handle the behavior of all DAWs, since there are so many that are on the market? So Pluginval has been really invented for that purpose, to test these different case scenarios. Are there other different things that developers can do to ensure that their plugins are working across the spectrum, or would you say that really it's Pluginval that's the best tool for this? I think, sorry to interrupt, and I think that this brings up a question that I don't know has been really publicly discussed, and would probably make a great talk for a presentation, which is that different DAWs, that developers tend to know what some of the edge case scenarios tend to be for some of the DAWs. Like, for instance, with FL Studio, it's known that the buffer sizes change a lot, and that a lot of times those buffer sizes aren't necessarily a power of 2, so they come back with really strange buffer sizes. So if anybody wants to deliver a talk on some of the typical behaviors that you would see in different DAWs and what the differences in edge case scenarios would be, that would make a fantastic talk. Sorry, take it away, Dave.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say quickly is that testing is kind of really your only approach here. Yes, using tools like Pluginval, AU-Val, the VST3 validator will help you and get you a long way, because they're very low cost in terms of time and effort for a big return. But Pluginval and those tools they're kind of like a brute force approach. So they'll just do lots of stuff lots of times and hope that it will catch stuff. Try and simulate what hosts might do. Whereas if you actually run it in a host, you know that you're getting the behavior that host does. So also having a good QA team, having beta testers, people that are actually using your plugins in a real environment is also pretty essential, because there will be things that aren't covered by the testing tools, the validation tools. And one of the big things is give us feedback for what the DAWs do. If you find a weird thing that a DAW does, like it changes your bus layout without calling release resources, or does something in a weird order that you weren't expecting, you can write a test for that in Pluginval. There is really simple code. It's basically you get a plugin instance and you do some stuff to it, and you have some expect, or it'll crash. That's the other thing. So pull requests are really simple to write for that kind of stuff, or you can just say, I was using it in this DAW and I wasn't expecting this. And someone will probably say, yep, that's totally valid behavior for the DAW to do. Add it to Pluginval.
Great.
If you wanted to kind of comment on that anymore, Sudara?
Yeah, maybe I was just going to say Juice and other frameworks sort of aim to, smooth that experience over and provide a common API. They're all built on top of all these other APIs. And, I think the aim is there. It's just a very complicated territory. But there's often people experiencing the same issues that you might be. And so the Juice forum is a good place to always first check to see who else is running into these issues, especially because these are all moving targets. Every DAW is being updated, every operating system is being updated, and the Juice team's working hard on normalizing all that, but rely on people to speak up as well. And it's fun business.
I do think there was some kind of community effort on the Juice forums once to have a sort of publicly viewable or editable Google Doc that had, lists of odd behavior, so you could go and check it. But I can't remember exactly where or when that was now. If anyone listening knows of it, post it in the chat.
Great.
Or I might have just dreamt it. It's the kind of thing I dream of these days.
Yeah. Once again, if anybody's looking to make a really cool audio programmer meetup talk or ADC talk, talking about edge case scenarios, the things to look out for with particular hosts, I'm all ears and I'd love to hear about it. So get in touch. So this is something that you talked about already, Dave. But maybe if you have any more comments on this. So Ismar asks, did you succeed in integrating Pluginval into a TeamCity or Jenkins pipeline? So there are already a number of people who are using this on a daily basis within their CI pipeline. Did you have anything else that you wanted to mention about that?
I haven't specifically done it with Jenkins or TeamCity, but I do have it working in Azure pipelines and GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions stuff, you can see how it's being used from the Pluginval repo. And it's literally download it, unzip it, run it. So it should be easily callable from any environment.
Yeah. So there's another question that I think that we've answered, but if either of you want to make a comment about it, it's all good. So this from Vivid Active IT, who asks, why is this a web interface and not a local library? So it was a local library that's been made into a web interface. So maybe Sudara could talk a little bit about the motivation behind making this a web accessible tool.
Yeah. And also follow on from that with the kind of the technologies and the process involved, because I find that quite interesting.
Sure. So yeah, it just came out. It just bubbled out of work of downloading it locally and playing it and playing with it and using it and wanting to put it in CI. There's just friction to getting started with these sorts of things. So I thought naively that it would be pretty easy just to kick this together and get it working. That's why it's a web interface. It's just to sort of let you drag and drop something on, see what it looks like, and get your first taste. And if you decide it's useful, and downloading an app is also not that tough to do. And then there are other ways like CI or use it as a library. But so in a way, it's just a nice sort of gateway drug to getting started with plugin validation, assuming that it works. I'm sorry that it didn't work for the live demo. I feel like I tried it right after and it works fine. So I don't know what the problem was. But yeah, so as far as the stack, I come from a web dev background and like DevOps. And so I was especially overconfident thinking about how easy this would be. And we had just cooked up all these GitHub Actions to, run on every platform, run Pluginval on every platform. So I thought, hey, I'll just take the stuff, copy and paste. Let's go. So actually, this web service does use the GitHub API and runs these plugins through GitHub Actions. What happens is that when you upload a zip, it sanity checks it first on the server. It doesn't open up the zip it just inspects it to make sure there's a plugin inside. And if so, what architecture? I think in the case of Mac, it actually has to verify the architecture by opening it up and then deleting it. And then what happens is it's sent over to, or actually the GitHub runner spins up and asks for it, and via a shared secret, it's sort of sent over. And then basically the GitHub runner runs it, and we're constantly kind of polling and asking for, how far along are you? Do you have the logs yet? And then we eventually dump the logs out. GitHub runner is destroyed, the plugin is then deleted, and the logs remain. And you have the ability to sort of delete these logs. But the tech stack is Ruby on Rails, which I have a lot of experience with, and there's WebSockets involved for all the live polling. And yeah, I think that's it, maybe.
Yeah, that sounds like
I just want to add one more use case for the web front end, which is for end users who aren't developers. So we have a DAW, and we have a built-in tool for Pluginval. So you can, it kind of actually does, it downloads the latest version of Pluginval and will run your validation and give you the log, which we sometimes ask people to do if we get customer support. We say, hey, can you validate it and give us the log? Because it might help us to see what's going on and gives us a good entry point for when we open discussions with plugin developers. We can say, hey, we found this that's happening because some user is trying to get the textual string of this parameter or something and it's crashing. So it's quite helpful for speeding that up. But if you're not using Waveform and you're using some other DAW, users are very used to using websites. So being able to just, validate a plugin by drag and drop, and then copy some text into a support ticket is really kind of wonderful.
It's good if you're feeling lazy,
Yeah.
I use it when I'm feeling lazy. I'm like, I can't even be bothered to open an app, just drag it in there.
Yeah, you would be amazed at how much of a barrier to entry either downloading something is or having to type something out on the terminal. It really is a barrier that's just way beyond most people's energy levels, whereas drag and drop is something they do thousands of times a day, so it's more likely to happen.
Yeah. Tugril asks if there's a list of tests that are performed
on Pluginval or the tests that it does.
Yeah, I guess on Pluginval, just the different tests that actually happen through Pluginval. Is there a list of those of what actually tested?
I don't know if there's a flat list. It would be easy to add, but or you could just get the repository and do a search for public unit test, because they all inherit from Juice unit tests. So you can see the title, they're pretty descriptive.
Yeah.
But we could add something to dump that out. Someone added support to specify a list of tests to disable, so those strings don't change.
Mm-hmm. Paul Davis and a few other people have asked if there are any plans to include testing of UI interactions such as resizing.
Everyone always asks this. So resizing is actually something we probably could do. That could work. The question then is resizing along with doing what? We have tests that open the UI whilst it's processing audio and changing parameters and stuff. Would you want to resize whilst it's also doing that, or just open the UI, resize it? There's a kind of confusing finding out whether a plugin is resizable is also, I think there's two different ways to do it, because VST3 had a different way, but I'm not sure if they now removed that second way or not. So yeah, try it. Just add a test, create a window, resize the window, and see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, which is that these are abstractions around different plugin formats as well, which all have their native methods for calling different things like resizing a plugin. And so I think that it's very easy to possibly overlook the fact of the amount of work that needs to go into a lot of these things, because a lot of times we view VST3 and AU as being just different forms of the same thing, but there are actually very significant differences between those that tools like Juice and Pluginval have actually abstracted out.
I should note that almost all of that effort is Juice's part. They do an incredible job on trying to unify those interfaces and giving you a consistent API to program against. And Pluginval really is just utilizing that. I kind of describe it as a Juice plugin host that, you know, doesn't produce any audio or anything. It just hammers your functions of the plugins to give you kind of coverage. So it's really Juice that, as you say, is doing the job of consolidating significantly different plugin APIs that are becoming more different as well. So, you know, VST3 is a very different beast to Audio Unit.
Right.
And LV2 has just been added now, which works in a completely different way as well.
Yeah. And now we have Clap as well. So, yeah.
Looking forward to the Clap Juice hosting or plugin format, and then we can add it into Pluginval.
Yeah. And if you're looking for it's a few years old now, but if you're looking to make a deep dive into the differences between those APIs, there's a great talk a few years ago from Fabian Rengiles talking about plugin APIs and the differences between them. So very fascinating talk if you want to get under the hood of what Juice is actually doing and abstracting out for you, and talk about those differences. So
that's actually a really good talk as well if you're just doing any kind of library design, because it goes over the choices that the people made when designing those libraries. It's a good one.
Yeah.
I just wanted to interject one thing, which is my favorite thing about running Pluginval locally is that it automates your UI and you get to see it go crazy. And like, I've got lots of colored bars, and it's just like they're, you know, because it's automating it as fast as it can. And it's just, it's like a little fireworks show. I recommend it.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I guess it does that, which most DAWs, I know we do when we do an offline render. So as fast as the processor can handle, we close all the UIs before we do that, probably because of that reason. But Pluginval actually keeps the UI open to test that case. So it'll be interesting to see if that's something that breaks. And just to follow on from the original question, which was about testing UIs. This was traditionally really hard with Juice, because what people really want to do is say, oh, I've got my UI. Is this button in this position, or can I click it? Is it visible? And there are all kind of strategies for like creating a bitmap and then comparing it using image comparisons. That doesn't really work a lot if you've got parameters that might move around or animations and things. But Juice has since added accessibility support, which gives you a really good handle into the position and representation, labeling of things. So there might be some interesting ways you can kind of delve into that aspect of things.
Fantastic. We have one more final question before we move on, which is actually a little bit of a question that's a little bit not quite as relevant to Pluginval specifically, but I think it'd be something that you probably have some good advice on. And this comes from Manuel Jerome, who asks, how do you get noticed by prospective employers while contributing to open source projects? And this could be something that may be more of a Sudara question, because he has some great. I see a face of surprise from Sudara.
Yeah, no, I like this topic because like I've contributed to open source for, 15, 20 years, and honestly, it's the thing that gets me jobs when I want them, when I'm not trying to build a business. But I think, the audio community is pretty small. So if and the number of open source projects is also, there's a lot. There's a couple hundred. Actually, I have a list called Awesome Juice. If you Google Awesome Juice, it's a list of all the Juice open source projects. And I think contributing to any of them, if you start to build some momentum and contribute a few things here and there, I think that's really valuable. And as I think if you bring it up in an interview or even before the stage informally, I think that's enough. Just pointing to the fact that you committed to a particular project, I think it shows a lot more than competence. There's like initiative, and there's also like a values, that you value this thing. So I think it's really, I would vote for it as one of the best things you could do if you're looking to sort of break into the industry.
Yeah. And just to add to that, in terms of it's a lot closer to working with a real team contributing to an open source project than working on your own kind of private code and then showing that to a prospective employee, because you probably have to do things like initial discussion, there's code reviews, there's pull requests, there's CI to pass. So it kind of really shows that you understand that process. And it's obviously just a really good way to say, hey, here's some code that I did that was deemed good enough to be accepted into this project. And it gives you prospective employees a good way to look at what you've actually done.
Right. You bring up a fantastic point, which is that there is a world of difference between creating a product in Juice that works on your computer and you've done on your own, and it works in your DAW and it works just fine, versus working with a team that has a CI pipeline with running Pluginval, where you have to coordinate with teams, handle pull requests, dialogue, where you may be only working on a very small portion of a particular product. So, when you're working with a team on a DAW, for instance, it's not like the whole team just has at it on the entire DAW. You may be working on one specific feature of that product, a very small window of that product, and being able to coordinate with the wider team about what features are going to be integrated, what the priorities are, working through Jira backlogs and so on, shows a world of experience. And one final thing that I'll say on that is, as a person who runs a recruitment and contracting company, is that we get so many CVs from people, and a lot of times, one of the first questions that we ask people is, well, what have you built, right? So I always say to people, if you were a painter or if you were a singer, one of the first questions that a person on the street may ask you is, well, show me something that you've painted. Show me a song that you've sung on, right? Because they want to see what you've done. And it's no different for audio software development. If a person says, hey, I'm an audio software developer, the first question that somebody may ask is, well, what have you worked on, right? What are projects that you've contributed to? What are products that you've made? And probably one of the most significant things that you can show is that you've been contributing to an open source project that is with a team that has that full pipeline, because that's the closest thing that you're going to get to a simulation of what it's working like in an actual company. So, and like Sudara said, there are several fantastic projects. This is one of them. If you want to work on synthesizers, there's the Surge synthesizer project run by Bacon Paul, which is a fantastic, fully featured open source synthesizer built with Juice. And there are a couple other fantastic ones. And there's a full list that Sudara has created on awesomejuice.com. I've put the URL in the chat description for anybody that wants to go and check it out. Fantastic. Cool. So I think that that wraps that up. Thank you very much, Dave and Sudara. Okay.
You're welcome.
Great. And now, before I pass things on to Rachel for our second exciting talk of the evening, just want to remind you about our audio programming community. So we have a really vibrant audio programming community that consists of audio developers of all different experience levels and backgrounds. come join us and talk audio dev stuff with us. You can find out more about that on theaudioprogrammer.com/community. And with that, I will pass things over to Rachel to introduce our second talk.